Recording in progress. Okay. So, yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Milestone. I was kind of listening through, I was working my way through all the Pro Tools sessions that I recorded Milestone on. I've been working my way through them, just getting them ready for this workshop, and it's been really fun, actually. I've been enjoying, like, picking it apart myself after a kind of long break. And there's been a few surprises for me. Like, there's things that I remember really clearly, and then other things I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot we did that. And because there's so much happening in the music, there's loads of layers and everything, and some things in the mix maybe kind of got a little bit lost. So there's been a few little surprises. I'm like, oh yeah, that part, I can't really hear that very well in the mix, which is a shame because it's kind of a cool part, but there's always sort of a little bit of compromise when you're kind of pulling this stuff together, especially when you've got so many layers. There's only so much you can kind of hear at one time. So anyway, hopefully this will be a bit of fun. Thanks everyone for questions that have come in. I think I've no plan for today. I'm just going to kind of wing it a little bit. But it's good because I've got some good questions and I've got a few ideas myself of things that I might sort of talk about. I guess I'll just kind of get started at the beginning of the album. Just going to remind myself of some of these questions so that I kind of pull on them at the right moment. So, starting at the very beginning, Wind in the Trees. I'm just going to share my screen. So just a little bit of a backstory about how the project itself. I was asked to write some music for Celtic Connections, and it was really just a bit of a blank canvas. I was just asked, would you put together some new music? It can be a collaborative effort, or you can write all the music yourself. Really, it's your gig, and just do whatever you want, which is amazing, but also it is like the ultimate blank canvas where really the only thing you've been told is you've to write 45 minutes worth of music, and that's pretty much it. So I've always struggled with getting started on projects. My background really, where I'm most comfortable is sort of being the bass player in the band and being an arranger. Really, like I've worked with bands for years. And been really kind of heavily involved in arranging music. So quite often someone will write a tune or a song, whatever, and they'll bring it to the band, and I'll have loads of ideas of ways that we could arrange that tune or that song, thinking about chord structures or just even the song or tune structure itself, ideas about how we could develop it. And I guess that's kind of one of the reasons why I've really sort of enjoyed being a producer, because it's a similar kind of role as a producer when you're working with an artist or a band and they've got something already and they're just looking for someone to make it something new, something bigger and better than what they already have, or kind of seeing maybe things in it that they've not seen themselves. And that's really kind of where I'm most comfortable. So I've got a lot less experience in terms of getting something started from scratch. I've done it a few times now, but every time I do it, I always have this same problem of just not knowing how to get started. And I spent probably a good couple of months really exploring different ideas in my head and just sitting down at various instruments and trying to come up with some ideas. And actually, there's a really good question that Miranda asked, which was if there was any of the tracks surprised you in terms of what they became versus the initial idea, or did you have a firm idea of what you wanted from the beginning? And I had absolutely no idea what I wanted at the beginning. In all honesty, I think I probably had, in terms of like what the gig could be, I had maybe 2 or 3 really kind of fundamental ideas about what I was trying to create. And like there was a version of the gig that I thought there was going to be a lot more kind of, I suppose, cross genre, and more collaborative kind of thing. There was a gig that I wanted to put on. I've always wanted to put on just a really high energy sort of funk kind of thing, just constant funk with tunes, you know. I kind of played with that idea in my head. And then really kind of how it turned out, I suppose conceptually I kind of settled on the idea of like, okay, I think I kind of know what I'm trying to do. But to be honest, no, I think there was, the way that I work is often through just discovery, just always, you know, experimenting and discovering things along the way. And that's really how the whole project went. So I think even when I was halfway through a track, you know, there would still be surprises along the way and go, oh no, actually this is where it's going. This is what it's going to be, you know. So there was maybe some kind of ideas. There was some influences definitely behind the tracks, particularly as I worked out what kind of thing it was going to be and what I was responding to. There was some fundamental ideas, but there was surprises along the way with all of them. So Wind in the Trees was really the first idea that really stuck. After throwing loads of stuff against the wall and seeing what stuck, this was the first idea that really did stick. And the story is that I was getting really frustrated, actually. I'd been working on it for a few months and just felt like nothing was happening. And one day I was sat in my kitchen, and I'm going to show you a wee photo. So is this going to show you? Okay. So this was my old flat in Glasgow, and it looks absolutely immaculate in this photograph because this photograph was taken 2 seconds before I left the flat for the last time. We were just selling the flat. I was taking some photos of the place, but this was our kitchen, and you can see just a tree just outside the window. And I was kind of sat in that little sort of window seat. The window was slightly open, and it was a really windy night, and the sound of the wind in the tree was actually calming me down because I was getting a little bit worked up about the fact that I wasn't getting anywhere with the project and time was ticking, and I was getting really quite stressed. And then the sound of the wind in that tree was really calming me down. And I went through, and this is the tree from outside, actually. That was the view from out the window. I went through to the studio, and the studio, this is the back of the flat, and the studio was also at the back of the flat as well. This was my old studio. It was just the back bedroom of our flat, and that window also kind of looked out into that back courtyard. And I just stuck a couple of microphones outside the window to record the sound of the wind in the tree, and put headphones on and just listened to the sound of that tree, and just sat at the keyboard there and just started kind of coming up with just really responding to the sound of that tree. And it was a really special moment because it just really inspired me to kind of I don't know, just I was really happy with what came out. And I think part of it is the fact that it wasn't nothing. It wasn't a blank canvas anymore. There was a sound. There was a sound that I was responding to, and that I think that's really kind of stuck with me. Is, you know, I was doing a workshop with some kids the other day, and talking about this track, And I was kind of saying that it's like, if you're ever kind of stuck with anything, you know, if you've got a blank canvas and you're like, you just don't know what, like, do something to fill that space and respond to that, or something, so you're not staring at a blank page anymore. It was kind of really sort of fortuitous event. It wasn't at all planned, but it really worked for me. And actually, in Wind in the Trees, which I've got here, there is actually the sound of some wind, and it's exactly that night. I recorded it as I was kind of mucking around with ideas. Can just hear it kind of faintly there. So I'm really pleased, because that sound has stayed with the track, and it actually carries on all the way through the track. It starts right at the beginning. You can see it kind of goes through the entire track here. I do kind of bring the volume down in places and then back up in others, where you know, where the track kind of, where the music gets a bit quieter, and then the sound of the wind comes back up, and it's back in at the end as well. So that was it, and then I kind of just got started with the little kind of piano riff that kind of, in fact, it was really the B part piano riff that came first. This was kind of the first thing that I came up with, just against the sound of that wind. And eventually kind of came up with that kind of A part as a contrast to that kind of descending thing. So that was kind of how Wind in the Trees kind of got started, and it just all grew from there, really. It grew in different ways at different times. I think I kind of came up with the tune and the A part and the B part piano part, and I took it to the band just in that form, and we kind of jammed around it with the guys in the band. That was actually one of the big turning points for me as well, was actually deciding on who was going to be in the band. Because initially I had like ideas of different instrumentation, and like, maybe I'll have a sax player, you know, maybe I'll work with this piano player, you know, or maybe this one, and again, that was just, there was so many possibilities of what it could be that I couldn't actually kind of found it really difficult to focus my ideas. And once I had decided, like, okay, I know I'm going to work with these guys, and these are the musicians I want to work with on this record, I could hear all of their playing when I was writing the parts. I could really kind of hear their playing and how they would play the parts. And that really kind of helped me kind of just writing the music for those musicians was a really big turning point for me. So I should just say, if anyone does have any questions while I'm just kind of blabbering on, please just interrupt me. You can type into the chat box, or just come on the mic and just talk, or just wave at me if you want to say anything. I'd really love to kind of hear from you if you have any questions about anything I'm talking about so far. Is there anything so far? All good. All good just now. Okay, I'll just carry on. So that was how this track kind of got started. Really special moment was when I had been, as I say, I took the tune and that piano part to some of the guys in the band, and I think it was myself, Angus Lyon on keys, he was there, Patsy Reed was playing the fiddle part, Laurie wasn't there at the first rehearsal, I think Stu was there playing drums, so I think maybe it was like the four of us. Don't think Jarlath was there either. So I think it was just the four of us playing around this tune, and actually we were trying the tune in lots of different keys to see what worked best on the fiddle. I think it was written in D minor originally. It's in A minor on this version, because it just sounded really, it sounded a little bit more reflective on the fiddle. I think in D it sounded a little bit brighter, So we settled on A minor, and then there was this really amazing moment where we'd been playing around it, and then Chaz, the electric guitar player, he turned up late to the rehearsal, and he was just kind of getting his stuff set up as we're playing around, and he just joined in. And he'd obviously, Chaz is amazing. He doesn't read music. He just learns by ear, but he really does his homework, and he turned up and he'd listened to the ideas that I'd sent of that piano part, and he'd taken that descending thing, the B part of the piano part, and turned it into this guitar part. And where, if I can find it, yeah, it's this bit here, and he started playing this part here. Totally gorgeous guitar part. Totally love it. And it was when he played that, it was like, right, this now feels like it's really in the right space. I love those moments. So we kind of had like an arrangement of the tune just going round, just the ideas that I had. Chaz's really lovely guitar part. Stu was just doing some nice kind of cymbal stuff, keeping the drums out of the way. And then we worked, I think that was pretty much it for the first rehearsal. And I took those ideas away and developed them into, a bigger arrangement, and worked out this kind of really kind of big finish, where we're playing a lot of the same, a lot of the same ideas, but just much bigger arrangements. Callum's asking if I recorded the rehearsals. I have recordings of, yeah, probably some of them. I think some of them are on my phone. There was a video recording of some of the later rehearsals that Stu made, which are kind of cool. But yeah, I think, let's have a look. Let's see if I can find anything in my voice memos. When would that have been? 2019? No. When was it? No, we played it in 2019. Okay, went in the tree rehearsal. That'll have been a later rehearsal, was there? This is me playing away on the piano in my living room, just trying to find ideas for this. There's loads of stuff like that where I'm just kind of playing around, just different ideas. So that's interesting. I've not listened to that in so long. Obviously, I had an idea of it descending all the way down. Never used that. When was this? Okay, yeah. This is the band. Yeah. So obviously just kind of finding our feet with it and just playing around the idea slowly, and yeah, recording them and taking them home and listening through it and trying to work out which bits I liked and which bits maybe either went on too long or weren't quite working or whatever. And then just developed that, and then there was another rehearsal later on where we were kind of jamming over just the chords, and Laurie came along to that rehearsal, and she heard us just playing around the chords, and she was like, I can hear lyrics over this. I can hear some words over this. Can you record the rhythm section just playing around those chords, and I'll see if I can come up with something. And that's how she came up with the kind of song part of it. And actually, initially, we just jammed around the same chords throughout pretty much all of this track, and it was the tune, and then there was a song bit, and then we went back to the tune bit. And we performed it at Celtic Connections, and one of the things that I did at when we did the gig was I recorded the gig, but I didn't just kind of, set up a microphone in the back of the room or just record the output of the desk. We actually multi-track recorded the entire gig. So I had individual recordings, multi-track recording of like every instrument on stage. So after the gig, I could solo the fiddle and hear what the fiddle was doing at that certain point, or the drums or whatever. And everything that we did on the gig was to a click track, so it was always at the tempo. It was always at the same tempo. I had some programmed stuff that was happening at different times, that we were sort of playing along to, kind of thing. It was little bits. It wasn't a huge part of the gig, but there was like special effects or whatever that were just adding to the sound of the gig. So we did the whole gig to a click track. So everything was locked into the tempo it was meant to be. So that multi-track recording was actually a really useful kind of tool for analysing the music afterwards. It meant that I could really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what was working on the gig, what maybe wasn't, maybe parts that needed a little bit of refining. And one of the big things that I changed after the gig, having listened to it, was the middle section of Wind in the Trees, which is kind of the bit where when the vocals kind of come in at this point here. So at that point, we're still just kind of going around the A part, and then
ticking, counting.
Yeah, still going around the same kind of like piano and the same chord changes as the tune. But I just felt like it just went on a little bit too long, so I just sat down at the piano when I had a bit of free time, and I just started playing that piano part, and then just seeing where else it would take me. And I think the first thing that sort of came out that was a little bit different was, where is it? Where's this part? I think, is it this part here? Yeah, this bit here. So that's actually just the first few notes of the tune. It's just taking those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 6 notes of the tune and just looping them round and round. So I was just kind of playing around that and then just adding chords in underneath it. There's a really kind of weird delayed sound underneath that. Just kind of take it to a different kind of space. And just really developed that idea, and then really with it being the idea of this massive crescendo into this sort of reprise of the vocals. So yeah, and then the big crescendo, the big moment where the vocals kind of come back in. Just developing that same idea. And for me, that kind of made the big difference was going somewhere slightly different in the middle, so that when it returns back to the original idea, it has a bit more impact. So, I'm aware that I could probably talk for 2 hours just about this track, and we wouldn't really touch on anything else. I'd love to kind of go through and just solo out some of the. There's some really cool stuff in this. I'm Chaz's biggest fanboy. I just love the guitar parts in this. Just so cool. He's got this really cool thing that he does with the E-bow, which is it's like a magnetic device that you hold next to the pickup and the string, and it makes the string vibrate without actually having to touch it with the plectrum. That with like a delay pedal, so it kind of echoes the sound. So cool. It's almost a bit synth-like, which I really like as well, because it really kind of blends between the kind of synth parts and the acoustic kind of parts in the music. Very cool. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions about Wind in the Trees? I feel like I probably should move on to one of the other tracks. I'm trying to think if there's anything from any of the other questions that are relevant to this one.
I would be interested how you mix the drums. They sound so dense and then again totally muffled.
A lot. So, I mean, on this track, so the drums on this track, it's interesting because this is actually quite different from the other tracks. I programmed this. The electronic kind of drum kit for the kind of big sections, and it's just like they're kind of like 808 kind of analog drum synth, sort of fairly standard sounds. They've been distorted, crushed a little bit using this Devil Lock. Just so that you know what we're listening to in this session, this isn't the when I'm soloing the whole track, we're listening to the final product, but actually all the individual tracks in here, this is unmixed. We mixed the album in Glowworm Studios. It was Ian Hutchison was the mix engineer, and I kind of sat with Ian and went through it all over a number of sessions to get it right. So I don't actually have access to, like, I can't solo out how it sounded in the mix because I don't have access to that session. A lot of it was done through his mixing desk and using all of his equipment. So what we're listening to here is pretty much just the dry sounds as I recorded them, maybe with a little bit of processing just to kind of nudge it in the direction of the way that I kind of saw it going. But the drum part in this started out with this electronic kind of thing. Just using sort of different samples, and then when we did the drum sessions, the initial idea that I said to Stu was, can you just do like kind of really nice kind of cymbal stuff over the whole song? So he's just like kind of playing the rhythms of the tune and the rhythms of what's happening in the arrangement just on the cymbals all the way through. You know, he's just playing that, and he just did a pass all the way through the whole track. There's a couple of sort of cymbal swells that he does just using mallets, just for impact, you know, at the big crescendos, just to help build up those crescendos. But then Stu had this idea. He said, "That's great. I like all of the cymbal stuff, but I feel like when the electronic drum kit comes in, I could do a thing that's not like a drum beat, but just going round like the toms," which is kind of the thing that he did. So it's texture rather than a drum beat kind of thing, and he just wanted that to kind of complement what was happening in the electronic drums, like. checking in with the cymbals as well. So the electronic drum kit still kind of is the main kind of groove, but the toms kind of add just that little bit of interest. So was it this particular track that you were thinking of, Ralph? Was that the kind of thing you were thinking of, or is it more just intent the whole album?
No, it was just particular thing, and I think it was the humanizing of the electric drum kit that made it sound so special.
It's really, yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that's really just made the big difference, is just adding those toms in. I mean, that's, you know, you can, like, I wrote all the music myself, and I wrote parts for everyone, but what's great about kind of working with collaborators that you've worked with before and you've got a good working relationship with is just allowing space for those ideas to come through. And of course I wouldn't have come up with that idea, and you're totally right. I think it was that thing that Stu kind of brought to the table that really kind of brought, as you say, the kind of human element to the drum part. So yeah, no, that was a really, really nice observation. Thanks for mentioning that, because it's a really special part. Cool. Okay. Any other questions about this track before we kind of move on? I will move on just for the sake of kind of not blabbing on for too long about the one thing. I'm going to move on to the next track. I'm going to move on to Barnacarry Bay, and Innes had a question. Innes was in touch. I was hoping I was going to see him here this morning, but maybe he's still in his bed. Yeah, so Innes was asking, is the music for Stranger Things an influence, or is that just an 80s coincidence? Which I totally love. Because it is, I mean, I love Stranger Things and I love the music. If anyone's interested in music for TV or film, it's a brilliant podcast called, I've forgotten what it's called now. Art of the Score it's called, and it breaks down movie scores and also kind of some TV programs as well, and they do one on Stranger Things, and they talk about the music behind Stranger Things, and it's just brilliant. So yeah, Stranger Things is an influence in terms of, it wasn't like I instantly said, I didn't kind of think I want it to sound like Stranger Things at the beginning of this. This tune, it just, like, I was playing around with different sounds, and I stumbled on this sound, and it is kind of just the loop that happens at the beginning of Barnacarry Bay, if I can find it. This is it here. It is really Stranger Things. Actually, that part, it's using an emulation of a Jupiter, and actually that ties in with a question, another question that I had from Callum. Callum, you were asking, from compositional viewpoint, were the looped electronic elements like the arpeggiator discovered through experimenting with the synth like a Moog Live, or done entirely through MIDI? This part was on this, it was a soft synth. I know you kind of go on to say the timing of things that I find tricky when recording a track from a synth's built-in sounds. I know exactly what you mean. If you've got like a synth that's doing like a moving part like that, just for those of you that maybe don't know, the way that this is what we call an arpeggiator, and I didn't go in and play all those individual notes. What I actually did was just played a chord, and there's a setting on a synth where when you play a chord, rather than play all the notes, it'll play them in a sequence, and you can tell it whether you want it to go down or up and down, or various kind of different ways, whether you want to span 1 octave or 2 octaves. So all you need to do is just hold the chord, and it will play this moving part. I don't know whether oh yeah, okay, so I've got a keyboard here, so I mean I can choose just to play 2 notes, and it'll just go between those 2. I can add another note, just however many notes I add, it'll kind of arpeggiate through those notes. So that's what this part's doing. It's just playing literally the chords that are actually being played by the keyboard, or pretty much just the chords that are played on the keyboard. It's also playing on this synth. And when I came up with the idea for this part, I was actually trying loads of things just to add a little bit of movement. And I was trying, you can see actually, this is the Jupiter synth, but the actual MIDI part is called percussion loop, because originally I was looking for a percussion sound. I was looking for something that was just going to add just a little bit of rhythm to the track. And I just couldn't find the right kind of percussive sounds. And then I started playing around with using an arpeggiator on a synth. So this is an emulation of a classic synth, the Jupiter 8. And I loved it so much that actually it just became a really kind of big part of the track and how the track starts. And it gets really big at the end. So it's really kind of dark and moody at the beginning, and then at the end it's like really bright and so yeah, it kind of, you can use a filter to make it really kind of dark and smooth, or open it up and make it really bright and much kind of harder kind of sound. So that's what's happening in that. But yeah, Callum, I know what you mean. If you're trying to get a synth to do that, like an external synth, and get it to sync up with your project, it's a pain. It's really, I don't have any specific advice to give you other than, it's like your offsets and experimenting with your offset values. You can always do a test of playing a MIDI note and recording the sound of the synth, working out how long the distance is between, then that's your offset. It never really works. I know what you mean. I struggle with that stuff. Most of the stuff that is I suppose, yeah, I must have managed to get it to work, because I do record with the external synths. I've got my Moog and my Korg over here, which I used a lot on this album, and I had them synced up and they were working, but probably through a bit of a process of experimentation, lining things up afterwards as well. So yeah, these are the challenges of working with electronic music. Actually, I may as well just, while I'm talking about that, Callum's other question was, with this project, how much consideration did you give to being able to recreate it live during the writing process? Always curious when it comes to projects that have strong electronic elements, and now as it's been developed in the album, would it all be played live by the musicians, or would there be any elements added through any other means? So yeah, when I was writing the music, I was thinking about the live gig all the way through writing it, because that was the purpose of, I was commissioned to write music to be premiered at Celtic Connections. So the main thing was like, I need to write something that we can play live. And then the album, I always had it in my mind that I was going to record an album of the music. So I was keeping that in my mind when I was writing it as well, but that was a sort of secondary thing. But now that it has been recorded, we've developed things. I mean, I was soloing some guitar parts. There's obviously sometimes like 4 or 5 guitar parts playing at the same time. There's multiple synth layers going on all the time. So it would be impossible to actually play everything all at the same time. But I think what we would do, and hopefully what we will do if we do perform it live, is, as I said before, we did the first gig with a click track running so that we had some elements. I would have that happening as well, so that where we do have like maybe guitar parts that are thickening up the sound, but there's something that's the main guitar part. Chaz would be playing the main guitar part. We would maybe have the thickening kind of guitar sounds kind of happening at the same time. Same with the synth stuff. Some of it might be just triggered with MIDI live on stage, so the synths are actually sitting on stage, but they're being sent the signal to play the notes at the right time. And then some things where that's maybe not possible, like for instance this synth part here, I would probably just have the loop of this playing while I was playing other synth parts, and I think that's, you know, it's fairly standard practice, particularly in kind of sort of pop music, where, you know, a band will go on stage and they'll have loads of stuff that's being played in basically backing tracks, but there's an argument for trying to keep things as live as possible. With this project, I think sonically there's just so much to it that's been developed in the studio. I'd like to try and recreate as much of that live as possible. So yeah, there would probably be some of the sort of background elements would be played on backing tracks, and we would be playing the kind of main stuff, you know. That's Stranger Things. It wasn't intentional, but when I kind of found the sound, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's a bit Stranger Things. Like, I recognised that it was, and just accepted the fact that I was probably ripping someone else off. But then the music for Stranger Things, that's kind of ripping off music from the 80s, you know. Paul Jennings is joining the room. So, hi Paul, how you getting on? I'll let him join. So yeah, we've got this sort of synth thing happening. And then there's another synth thing that comes in, which is basically just the melody played on a Moog, and then the same melody played just displaced by a couple of bars. And basically that happens. There's four, you can actually see it here. So we've got the melody comes in there, and then there's four different times of the melody, all displaced by a bar or 2 bars, whatever it is, so that you get this round kind of thing that's happening. And the effect that it creates once everything's in is a little bit like an arpeggiator.
That's just too clever.
Hi Paul, how you doing?
Hi man.
Good to see you.
You too. Sorry I'm late.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, so that's what's happening there, and that keeps going through. I'm just going to start soloing out synth parts on this, because there's a whole load of stuff. Just the main keys parts. So Angus Lyon played the keys on this, and when we on the whole album, and with all of the keyboard parts, like I kind of did most of the sort of synthy kind of things. He did most of the more kind of electric piano, organ, kind of more traditional kind of keys stuff. But rather than just recording the sound of everything, he did all of this actually just in his studio, Grand's house studio. I just sent him the files, and I sent him all the parts and all the files. I did go and meet him for a day, but a lot of this he just did on his own. And he was great, actually. He said, on most of the tracks, I'll give you like the straight track, and then I'll give you like the track that's kind of got like a little bit, yeah, so here we go. Super straight, first version sent. Number 2, new version with a bit more character. So he sent another version of it that had a bit more character. And then number 3, drunken arsehole take. And he would do that on all of the keys parts, so that there was the drunken arsehole take. I would never use all of it, but there would always be like a little thing every now and again that he would play that was like just genius, and I could just edit that in. So it's brilliant. He did that on all the tracks. Super straight, new version with a bit more character, drunken arsehole. Amazing. And we recorded all of the keys using MIDI rather than audio. So you can kind of see on this, like, these are the actual notes that he's playing on the piano. And for anyone that's kind of watching that maybe doesn't know, MIDI basically is, rather than the sound of the instrument, it's the information about what he's played, or what the keyboard player has played. Down here we can see where the sustain pedal's been held down and then released, and then so what it means is that you can then send that MIDI signal to a keyboard or a synthesizer, or in this case this emulation of a Rhodes piano, and I can tweak the sounds afterwards. And one of the things that I found with this track was I loved the sound of the Rhodes, always wanted it to be the sound of the Rhodes, but it just felt a little bit too plain, and it didn't feel big enough for the track actually. And what I ended up doing was doubling. So I copied that MIDI part and doubled it onto another a synthesizer, just playing exactly the same part, and then that kind of thickened things up a little bit. And then actually I took that part and then added a little bit of chorus, which detunes it a little bit and makes it sound wider. And then that meant the keys just took up a much kind of wider space. Exactly the same part, but that's just the original part. And then with those synth parts doubling up. And that's something that we did throughout, or that I did throughout. Angus will have recorded it thinking it will be on this one sound, and then I'll have taken the MIDI and completely changed the sound, or like layered it up. So that's kind of a big part of the sound of the album, I suppose, is the way that layers, like the way that I've layered kind of a lot of things, a lot of the textures. It's maybe quite subtle, but it's maybe what kind of gives it a little bit of width and depth. And yeah, so there's a few kind of, actually this is a really good one to talk about. So Stu's drum part, really cool drum part on this, pretty straight kind of drum kit kind of thing. And then he did this thing in the middle where he's going round all the toms. Those toms were all kind of recorded as an overdub, so we still had the main kit part going, but then we'd have the toms playing. But then he did this thing. Now, can I solo out the right thing here? Yeah, okay. So what that is so there it is there. Okay. So this was what he was playing here. So there was like some broken cymbals on some toms. To the right hand side there, that's like an old gas stove, like the top of an old gas stove. There's this weird thing you can see with springs coming up. I don't know what you call that. It's just this weird thing's been created to create just clangs and doings and all sorts of weird things. And he did this on a couple of the tracks where we just did it as an overdub, and he just like played around the part on this weird trashy kind of sound. That's actually the sound of it there. Then I put some distortion on it, which is cool. But then I ran that same sound through a synth called a Korg MS-20, or an emulation of a Korg MS-20. And it allows you, that synth allows you to like plug an audio signal into it and like tweak the sound using all of the controls that you would normally use on a synthesizer. And I created this really weird, like, so it's just this kind of really, like, really strange, but kind of blending that, sort of blurring the lines between that acoustic sound and the electronic sound. What's it sound like in the track? This is one of these moments where, as I was saying before, sometimes there's just so many things happening that you don't hear all the individual elements going. So you can kind of make out a little bit of that kind of, the more you kind of hear the synthy kind of thing happening on that. But it's just everyone playing really loud all at the same time. So it's quite hard to kind of make everything out. There was another synthy thing happening there. That's that same synth actually, the MS-20. Just a kind of weird arpeggiated thing happening. I will carry on. Paul, just so you know, I was saying to everyone, just interrupt me if you have any questions at any time. You can type into the chat box, or just stop me in my tracks.
I was resisting.
No, just feel free. No, it's fine. I'd love to hear your sarcasm.
Sorry. I was going to say that some of these bits individually are quite like, I don't know, they're quite like sci-fi. I love it. Yeah. It's like the Anunnaki is like speaking to us through your album.
Yeah, I guess, that's just part of me, I'm obviously just part alien. I don't know.
No, I love it. I love the I don't, yeah, like when you like solo things, there's quite a lot of sci-fi going on.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that when I really listened to the album. Yeah. Yeah, well, because they, I guess it kind of takes a back seat from like the melody instruments and the acoustic kind of things. But yeah, I guess it hints at that kind of thing. Yeah. That's one of the things that I really liked about Sorley's artwork for the album. There you have it.
Because there it is. And he came up with the concept for this. He came up with the idea of like the milestone that looks a little bit like the monolith, It's a bit sort of, Space Odyssey 2001, it's that kind of monolithic kind of thing. But to me, it feels like that is this really weird, otherworldly kind of thing that's landed somewhere in Scotland. And it kind of looks a little bit like a milestone, but also like some weird alien kind of thing.
It's like that thing that remember that thing like last year that kept showing up?
Right.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone kept tagging me in that photograph saying milestone. Yeah.
What are you up to?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, totally. It's exactly like that. That was kind of his whole kind of concept behind the artwork, which I totally loved, because it does kind of capture a little bit of that thing, whereas there's this weird sci-fi-esque kind of like otherworldly thing that's happening alongside something that's vaguely kind of Scottish traditional, and so yeah, no, it's all good. There's plenty more where that came from. All sorts of weird sounds. There's sound here that I've called Blade Runner, because it is a little bit like that, although it's sounding really dry. There should be some effects on that. That's doubling another cool E-bow part from Chaz, if I can find it. It's totally heroic. That's like heroic guitar playing right there.
I love that.
That's great. So what else is going on? Oh yeah, so strings on this album go between like played strings and synth kind of things, and quite often I'll double them up. So like the fiddle lines at the beginning of this track. So I wanted it to sound quite orchestral. And we tried like double tracking and triple tracking the fiddle part so that it sounded bigger, and just didn't have the right effect. And then instead, what I did was just use like a string, like a sample patch, like an orchestral string section, and doubled it with the actual sound of the fiddles. And it sounded a little bit fake, but I quite liked it. It's again, it kind of blurred the lines between acoustic and electronic, or synthesized. Dry like that, it sounds a bit naff, but we just, like, when we mixed it, we just went to town on it and just made it sound super kind of washy and actually it kind of starts, the fiddle starts kind of solo, and then it blends those kind of strings in. Just to kind of make it just sound much bigger. It doesn't sound like a real like orchestra, but I kind of like that. Later on, these strings kind of do sound a little bit more just string section.
See for your sorry.
Yeah, please.
See for your like sampled strings. Do you have a specific like sample pack that you like to use? Because it's always usually historically been quite difficult to find good sounding sampled strings, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yeah. I for this I used some of the Spitfire stuff. And it's not like they do like top flight, really expensive sample packs, but this was part of this was they do like a budget version, I suppose. It's like the Originals, I think it's called. Originals Epic Strings, I think was the name of the sample patch for this, and it's like 30 quid, rather than £1,000 or whatever it costs for their like top flight full orchestral, like you can, you know, single out all the different instruments and everything. This is just like a string patch that's designed for one purpose only, and that is that kind of slightly sort of cinematic kind of, you know, string kind of thing. It's not got loads of different articulations, so you can't make them suddenly do like, you know, tremolos and whatever. You know, you're kind of stuck with the one sound with it, but it does it well. And it worked for me, I think, because there's so much other stuff happening there. It blends in really nicely with everything else there. I will move on to the next track. Does anyone have any final questions about that one? I'll move on. So, Twac Orbis, which is, before I move on, forgot the most important part of talking about Barnacary Bay is actually the photos from Barnacary Bay. So Paul was there. This is Barnacary Bay. This is where we went to celebrate the release of Croft Number 5's Talk of the Future.
I was there.
You were there.
Yes.
I've got.
Well, maybe say no more. Anyway.
There you are. There.
Yes.
So this was.
That was quite a moment. I'll let you continue.
That was quite a moment. So anyway, we went to Barnacary Bay to celebrate the release of Talk of the Future, and we took tents and just had a party weekend. It was mental. It was brilliant fun, but it was pretty mental. And actually, Barnacary Bay, the whole arrangement, that was written as kind of a response to memories of that party.
The
and that time
certainly visited us that day.
Oh, it certainly did. That's actually a question that Rowena Roy asked. She said, "I'd like to know what memories come to mind when listening to each of your tracks." This is, you know, that's what this track is all about. Is about that time. There's Croft Number 5. When we kind of got back together and did a gig at Celtic Connections a couple of years ago. And actually, so I'm playing the Moog in this track, but I joined the band as the bass player when Sorley, the original bass player, left the band. And Innes, who's standing up in the middle there, he replaced Adam after Adam had left the band. But then when we kind of reformed for a few gigs, we just got everyone together. So it's good times.
Is that a puppy on Sorley's bass amp? Didn't realise he had a puppy on.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, I
hadn't
spotted that.
Anyway,
Right
I digress. Again.
So anyway, that's Croft Number 5. The next track, Twac Orbis, was written. So the first part of it, the vocal, the song kind of part of it, was arranged by Laurie and I. We'd been recording and releasing a song every month. It was her project. It was just under her name. And I was doing some really kind of subtle, really simple kind of keys parts or whatever. We had Stevie Burns playing some guitar on a couple of tracks. But it was really just about, the main thing with the focus was the song. And we were away, we were releasing a song every month, and we went on holiday to Egypt, and in the time that we should have been recording a track. So I took a laptop, took a microphone, and we, while we were over in Egypt, we recorded the vocal for this track, and I just had some samples with me and just came up with like an electronic drum part to go with the vocal. And we had no other instruments with us. So that's kind of why this track, the original version is slightly different from this, but it's essentially the same thing. And we just layered up loads of vocals. And I programmed this kind of, again, just programmed like an electronic drum part. Yeah. Just programmed this kind of really weird glitchy drum kit. When I hear this, I just picture sitting on a beach in Egypt with headphones on and a laptop. It was totally amazing. But Laurie just recorded a vocal, her main vocal, and then recorded, overdubbed lots of different vocal parts. And I'll just kind of go through them all. Innes had a question. He had a few questions about this track. So he says, how do you get that mad, silvery, creepy vocal sound? And how does it not sound weird? It ties in so nicely to the warmth and the feel of the rest of the track. So Laurie's vocal, her main vocal, soloed.
As I come by on altar's end.
That's just her vocal. There's a little bit of processing on it. There's a little bit of... Is there a bit of distortion on that? Yeah, there is. But it's... that's just the dry vocal, and a big part of this track is just the delay. It's like an echo. It's the delay that I'm using. And normally when you use a delay, it will just like, it'll just be like a single, like, so if I was to say 1, it would go 1, 1, 1, 1. Like it would just be like in time, and it would just sort of fade away over time. And it would just be like single notes like that. But with this delay unit, you can, I'm using this Echo Boy delay unit, and you can program different rhythms for the delay to take, and it can send them left and right and all over the place so that it kind of creates this kind of cool rhythm. And a lot of the sound of this track is just the sound of that delay unit.
As I come by on altar's end, I saw Tokorbi sitting there on.
You can just hear it tailing off, and that's like that. Essentially, that the sound that Innes is talking about. The delays are, in fact, I've got the delays just here. We can actually hear them without the main vocal. So like a lot of the low end's been taken out, and it's been sort of maybe brightened up a little bit. But because it's kind of creating all these kind of different rhythms, you're hearing like, particularly you can really hear like the S and the T sounds coming through. So you get these kind of really weird, like kind of really weird kind of rhythms happening in the top end. So I think that's maybe the sound that Innes is asking about, how did I create that sort of silvery vocal sound? That's a big part of it, is just like the right type of effect on the vocal, and that's just this delay. There is another thing that we did on the vocal on this, which is towards the end, is Laurie whispered the sound, whispered the last verse as well as that's her singing it, but we've also got double tracked her whispering it. And you put the vocal on top of that.
The birds are big in their nests, but I'll flee high above.
So you get this kind of really weird, otherworldly kind of vocal sound happening with the whisper combined with that delay. Just the other vocal things that she did, she would take like little snippets of one of the words, like literally like, so this one's called fr, because that's kind of what she's doing. She's just going fra, and I think that just does the same note over and again. Yeah. So we double tracked it, and I just looped it, and that kind of created this accompaniment part for the lead vocal. So she did a whole load of those. So there's one called Skrr. So like an echoing kind of two different parts echoing each other. There is krika. So this one, I got her to record a few different notes, and then I kind of created chords out of it. So there's like sort of chord movement in the vocal part, and then added a third one in. So it kind of almost becomes like a keyboard part, just with vocals. And then there's the last one. What's the last one? That one I can actually hear. I think with the one that I played before, I think she sung most of those notes. That one sounds like I've actually processed that. So she's probably only sung like a note or maybe a couple of notes, and I've taken that into a program called Melodyne where you can change the pitch of things, and I've actually just created a kind of a chord part using Melodyne. Which, interestingly enough, is a technique that Björk uses a lot. And a lot of the big influence for this track was actually the early Björk stuff, because I loved that kind of thing with the layered vocals and the style of drum programming. So like in the drum part, it's a really kind of straight drum part through most of the track. It's all quite straight, but there's a really cool thing that Björk has on a couple of her tracks, on particularly her early stuff, where there's a really cool kind of swing to the drum programming, and I did that for the last verse. So it goes from really kind of straight thing here, yeah, so like a really kind of swung kind of thing over this bit, so it's kind of got a bit more of a kind of bounce to it. And one thing that was loads of fun on this, again, like Stu doesn't, obviously because there's lots of electronic stuff on this, he had the same approach as he had to when he did the tom part over Wind in the Trees. He said, right, well, obviously I don't want to be playing a drum kit part over this, but how about I do an overdub on that trash kit that I was talking about earlier on, the gas stove and everything. So he did that, and he just kind of did some random kind of hits around. And actually, what happens if I do this? Okay, yeah, so this is him just doing like a pass. Kind of hear like that's different. So it's like, it's cool, but sometimes it's a little bit out of time, and I really wanted this to be super rigid, like properly kind of programmed kind of sound. So I took what he did and I did quite a lot of editing on it, and kind of made sure all of the drum sounds were happening bang in time. Every time he hit anything, it was exactly in time. But the other thing that I did was, like, rather than let something sustain, so like rather than let this hit sustain for as long as it did, and this one as well, you can see it kind of sustains a lot longer, I was cutting things off, like, so it's stopping dead in its tracks bang in time as well, and it kind of creates a much more like kind of weird programmed kind of thing happening. And I think even at times, like I would do like, oh yeah, like I reversed a thing. Can hear my child screaming in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear that. So that's what I did with that, and so that it kind of blended with the program drums. So it kind of sat with them really nicely, you know. So it's kind of, again, a blend of programmed and played, but the played stuff sounds a lot less human because it is actually really kind of chopped up and everything. So it really starts going at the end. Yeah, so that's what's happening there. And then Innes did have a question about, he said, where is it? Twack Orbies, is the static noise at the start nuclear? It's cool. So there's like the clicks that start at the beginning of this track, like this sound. That sound there is actually it's a sample. I don't know whether I've got it here. Woodblocks, is that it? Feel like there's another one. I'm just using, like, again, it's a sample library and it is a wood block. It's like a sample of like an acoustic wood block. But it's when on the plugin you can, so the decay is taken right down so that it's a really short kind of thing. If I take the decay up, you can kind of hear. We'll take that processing off it. It's sounds like woodblock, but with the decay. It's just those clicks, and there's an articulation called Geiger. So when you hold a note with that articulation, you're telling it to. You can do different articulations, so you can make it do like standard kind of drum things, like, you know, different strokes, a flam, drag, whatever, roll. So you can tell it to basically do like a drum roll by holding down a key. When you play the drum, it'll make it do a drum roll. But it has this really cool, weird one called Geiger, which makes it sound like a Geiger counter. So in answer to Innes's question, yes, exactly. It's kind of sounds like a Geiger counter. The idea behind those clicks was that it was like, because it's the Twack Orbies, the two crows. It sounds like the sort of pecking of the two crows as it starts the track, but not a natural sound, like, again, making it like a, you know, electronic kind of sound. So that was the idea behind that. And that's all this track is. It's just those elements. It's the program drums, Stu's weird trash kit all cut up. There is an organ. This was actually the organ part that Angus played live. As I said, a multi-track recorded the whole gig, so I could actually use some of the things that we played live. And actually the organ part that he played live had just a cool vibe about it, and he tried to recreate it in the studio, and for me it just never sounded as cool as the original one, so I just used the original. And actually there's a little bit of me playing some stuff on the Korg, which is the silver keyboard on top there. I don't think I didn't have like a plan for this one, so I was just playing around with it as Laurie was singing her song, and I was creating weird whooshes and weird kind of sounds. again, a question from Innes was also high-end sweeps that sound like stars falling through the atmosphere. How do you do that? And that is just on the Korg. I get my camera over it. So you can do a thing. You can do a thing where rather than the keyboard playing notes, the filter has a thing called resonance. So the filter is what makes something darker or brighter on a synth, and you'll often have this control. It's called resonance, and if you turn the resonance right up, the filter actually starts to make its own noise. So I'm not going to get too into the sort of the nuts and bolts of how synths work, but basically, without the resonance up, I've not got any sound being generated in this keyboard. And if I play a key, there's no sound coming out. But if I turn up the resonance all the way, the filter actually starts to sing, because it's kind of whistling at one frequency, but all the notes don't. They'll play the same kind of note. But if I move what we call the cutoff on the filter, so it makes it brighter or darker, actually changes the note of the that it's kind of whistling at. So if I turn the cutoff up, it's a really high noise. Sorry, if I turn it all the way down, it's a really low noise. So all I was doing on that track was just playing with this cutoff. And if you want to create like that kind of sort of star falling from the atmosphere kind of thing, you can I can try and do it at the same time. Just move the filter down as you let the note sustain, and I can just turn the filter down. So it's just basically doing that with loads of effects on it, loads of delay and reverb on it. And I was really I had no plan for this track, and I was just making lots of those weird sounds. You can turn up the noise. So it's just basically white noise that you can send through the filter, and you can do the same thing. You can filter it and make it kind of brighter or darker. Because Innes was actually asking how I create wind noise digitally, and that's all I'm doing is like there's on the synth there's a noise control, which is just white noise going through the filter and just opening and closing the filter and adding some delay and reverb to it. So that's all that is. Mucking about while, you know, everyone else was like playing like real music. I was just like making silly noises on the synth. But I liked them, so I kind of kept them. So that's me doing those kind of wind noises. Just kind of creating some sort of atmosphere along with everything else that's happening. And that was it. We like the original version with Laurie didn't have that organ part. It didn't have the Korg wind noises, and it didn't have Stu's kind of trash kit kind of thing. But pretty much we re-recorded it for this album because we did it in a different key. But it was the same arrangement. It was the drum part and all those vocal parts and that vocal delay. That's all that's happening. But I wanted to turn it into something that was, you know, good for the band to play. So I arranged it with the tune at the end. Anyone have any questions about that song before I move on?
It's very different to the old Blind Dogs version.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Trois cordes.
I mean, I'm not surprised, really.
Totally is. Yeah, it's great. I just love how I never realized like quite, because it all works together, but just hearing about the layers and all the crazy shit that's going on behind everything is really interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's good. And I was saying to the guys earlier on, when you kind of leave a project behind, you kind of forget some of the things that went into it. So I was preparing these tracks for the workshop, and it was good fun for me as well, like soloing things out and going, oh yeah, they played that thing at that part. That's kind of cool. And things that I'd maybe forgotten about, because you're right, when you hear the full thing, maybe you're not listening to each individual part, you're just hearing the effect of everything. And then I just arranged the tune, and all it is just the melody from the song looped round and round, and I made a 3-part harmony. I wrote some chords, and we just layered like fiddle part after fiddle part, violas, all playing those different that 3-part harmony of the tune with different harmonies coming in at different times. Had the pipes play it. Angus did his like few different kind of keyboard parts. We double tracked those. Chaz did a really cool kind of Nile Rodgers impression on the guitars. He did like this cool thing, just like overdubs panned left and right of him not playing the full rhythm later on, but just the kind of poppy kind of thing at the beginning. Angus's funky kind of Rhodes parts. It's really cool. I played all of the bass and all of the bass on the Moog. Actually, I'll mention this just now. So that's me just kind of playing the bass part on the Moog, which is cool. But I wanted to make it bigger. One of the things that happens with synth bass quite often is, particularly when you listen on like an iPhone or something with like a small speaker, you can't really hear what the bass is doing. And it happens on other bass instruments as well, but particularly on synth bass, unless it's like really kind of like you can open up the filter and make it super kind of wiry or like kind of harsh kind of sound, and then it'll raspy kind of sound, and then it'll kind of come through, but sometimes that just sounds a little bit too aggressive, and I didn't want it to be an aggressive sound, so I came up with this idea of using what's called a talk box. And the talk box is this thing here. I'll show you here. So this pedal here, so the output of the Moog goes into this, and all this is there's a speaker inside that box. There's a little amplifier and a tiny little really crappy sounding speaker, and it outputs through this plastic tube. And I can get this to stay in the right place. And the other end of the tube you put in your mouth, and what you can do is the sound of the instrument comes up through that tube, and you put the tube in your mouth, and you can change the shape of your mouth, and it modulates, it changes the sound. It's used a lot by electric guitar players, or it was really kind of popular in 70s, I think, was when it really kind of became really popular. But it's had a massive resurgence recently. Synth players are using them loads at the moment, and if you get really good at it, you can actually you can actually speak with it. You don't actually make any sound with your own vocal cords. All you do is shape your mouth around the shape of the words, and you say the consonants but not the vowels. It's really difficult, and I can't do it, and I've been practicing and I can't do it. But some folk are really good at it. A really good example of it is Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger by Daft Punk. That vocal sound is like a classic talkbox vocal sound. But basically, so that's the sound of the synth coming through the talkbox. And if I go like that, I can change the shape of my mouth, and it changes the sound of the synth. I took that Moog part, that bass part that I'd recorded. First time it comes in, it's just on its own. But then when things kind of really ramp up, I double tracked. So I played back that Moog thing that I'd recorded through the talkbox and recorded just a pass of me just altering the sound of it using the talkbox. And then I did it a second time, panned them left and right, and you get this really kind of cool. So without those talkbox on, that bass sound kind of disappears a little bit on some systems. But with the talkbox, it kind of adds a bit of brightness. You can really hear it clearly on like on a phone or whatever. But also it kind of makes the synth kind of talk. You know, it makes it like again, it's blurring the lines between like analog and or sort of real world and electronic. So it kind of gives the synth a bit of a voice, which I quite like. And I used that later on in Titan as well. And in fact, this in Titan, I don't know if we'll have enough time to get to it, but this synth, the Moog actually plays the melody, and I use the talkbox for the melody sound on that. I want to make sure that I've got everyone's questions covered. I think I've covered everyone's questions so far. But yeah, this track is just like loads of fiddles layered up to create basically quite a kind of big orchestral kind of sound. And pipes and whistles playing the tune. The Moog plays like all three parts as well. Everyone's just kind of playing the same things. And then we've got the vocals that come in at the end. Just to give it just that final lift. So Jarlath and Laurie. Just to kind of give it that kind of lift at the end. And it's just the same thing round and round. One thing that's quite cool about this track in the drums is that we didn't just do like a standard drum take of Stu playing the kit part. We actually did everything separately. So like we recorded just the kick on its own, so we could get a super kind of tight kick part. I think we took all of the toms and everything out of the room so that there was nothing ringing. It was just the sound of the kick. And then he did like a pass with lots of different snare drums. And he had like this broken cymbal on one of the snare drums. So that kind of cool kind of sound is the sound of him hitting this broken cymbal on top of a snare drum. So he did just like a pass. It's kind of almost like drumline kind of thing going on. And I think he did another snare thing as well. Yeah, that kind of thing. Then like a cymbal thing, was it? Just did the hi-hats as their own pass, you know, so just layering this all up. Is this like shakers? It's another kind of hi-hat kind of thing. So yeah, we just layered up the drum part for this one. And it's kind of got that real sort of party vibe because it kind of feels a little bit like that kind of, I guess, the sort of, I don't know, like kind of South American kind of vibe kind of going on with the snare parts and everything, which is kind of cool. I love the little fill that he does. It's really cool. So yeah, that was the drum part on that. So this track, there's nothing really that kind of clever about it. It's just lots and lots of stuff layered on top of each other. I'll move on quickly.
I'm gonna have to depart if that's
okay.
If that's
no
okay.
worries. I'm recording, so you can watch the rest of it in your own time if you're interested.
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much. I'll obviously depart and say farewell, but beautiful stuff, man.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for your input.
Oh, no, not a problem. Take care, man.
See you later, man. So I will... Right, I'll talk very briefly about... I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures. So, Rolly. This is Rolly. And the track Rolly was written for this rabbit. And this is... Oh, no, that's not it. This is him and his sister, Rowan, and this is what they would do when they were really chilled out. They would just flop out on the living room floor. Rolly's the one on the left, Rowan's the one on the right. Rolly in particular would love to do this whenever I was playing Moon Safari by Air. He would chill out. If there was something that we played that he didn't like, he would thump on the floor. Because he would just wanted to tell us he was angry, I don't like this. And we'd play some really weird music and he wouldn't like it. But if we put on someone really chilled out, he would flop out like this. So this is another one of them flopped out like that, the big feet. So Rolly was written for that rabbit there. And I'll not go into too much detail about it, but yeah, Moon Safari was the influence behind this track, and in particular, there's like a synth that that they're really well known for using, and it's a string synth, Selena string synth, and I had an emulation of that. If I can find it, there we go, the Selena. That's kind of an emulation of this kind of old analog synth that Air would use a lot. And I've just kind of stacked the sound of like a Rhodes piano and that Selena string synth. And it just kind of has that kind of vibe of Moon Safari and that kind of thing. There's quite a few of the kind of whooshy kind of synth sounds that I was talking about on the Korg. That's that filter sweep that's happening with loads of reverb on it. It sounds like the stars falling from the sky. And that's totally reminiscent of Air Moon Safari as well. and that was kind of the start of this track, because I wanted it to sound a little bit like that album. And then I kind of wrote the tune over that kind of chord sequence that I kind of came up with on those instruments. And it kind of goes somewhere completely different. It kind of starts off sounding a bit like Moon Safari, and then it goes somewhere completely different. Kind of ends on that kind of sound as well. A couple of other things that are really interesting, or maybe slightly interesting. The beginning of this track, the piano here, and it finishes with that kind of thing as well. That's me playing that. Angus plays all of the other kind of piano-y kind of stuff on the album, but I wanted to play this particular piano sound and this particular piano part because I had in the living room where Rolly and Rowan lived was the old piano that I learned to play on, and we moved it into our flat, and it's sadly no longer with us because it's a baby grand piano, and we were lucky to have a living room that would take a baby grand piano, but we certainly don't have one now. But fortunately, it's still in the family. It's with my cousin. But this was the piano that I grew up playing, and it was, not the most well looked after piano. You can see it's a little bit tatty, and in fact, the rabbits destroyed the underside of it. They built a house underneath, and then they nibbled the underside of the piano. So it's loads of it's definitely rabbit worn. And there's probably little bits, they've jumped on top of the piano and nibbled the edges of it and everything. So I feel bad for my cousin who's taken the piano and it's completely destroyed by the rabbits. But anyway, I have really fond memories of sitting at that piano with the rabbits in the room and just coming up with ideas. And I think I started coming up with the idea for the chord sequence for this on that piano. And that's not actually the sound that's on. Unfortunately, it's not that piano that's on the recording. But I used a piano sound that made it sound a little bit softer, like the keys are a bit worn, the hammers are a bit worn, and it's this kind of really kind of soft kind of piano sound. And it almost sounds like me trying to work out what the chords are. It's not played really quick, fast or anything like that. It's just, and that's meant to be kind of set in the scene of me sitting in the living room with the rabbits. It means nothing to anyone else, but it works for me, and it kind of returns to that at the end. What else is happening on this? Drum part's pretty straight. Bass guitar, some really lovely layered guitar parts. There's a cool thing with the keyboards. Again, we went for it's not a Rhodes on this, it's a Wurlitzer, which is similar kind of electric piano sound. But I wanted to have a little bit more attack, so I doubled it. Again, I took that MIDI part and I sent it to what's called a mellotron, which is an old... do you have the mellotron here? This is it here, isn't it? Yeah. Emulation of what's called a mellotron. And a mellotron was a sort of... It's like a synthesizer in a way, but really all it is it's loads of tape machines, and so when you play a note on the mellotron, it actually plays one little roll of tape, and there's a roll of tape for every key on the mellotron. It's a really cool instrument. I've never played the real thing, but it's very cool. And you have all of these, you can load in different tapes for it, so you can have string sounds, or there's a classic one which is the flute sound. Let me see if I can get it happening actually. So I used a vibraphone for for this track. A really cool kind of vibraphone thing. But the one that's really classic is the flute sound, which... Oh, too loud, sorry. Which is a classic flute sound. And what's the Beatles track that it's on? There's a classic Beatles track that they used a mellotron flute. But it's a really cool. It'll come to me. It's a really cool instrument. Anyway, I used a vibraphone sample on the mellotron, and it kind of sounds. It sounds like a vibraphone because it is actually recorded, but it's recorded on really old tape, so it kind of wobbles around a little bit. And it's just a really cool sound. And I just stacked the keyboard with that vibraphone sound. Kind of gives it a nice kind of attack, which I really liked. So I'm starting to talk really fast because I'm aware that we're running out of time. Yeah, are there any questions about Rolly at all? Okay, I'll move on. Just quickly talk a little bit about the other tracks as well. We've got some chat. Strawberry Fields, that's the one. Exactly, yeah. Strawberry Fields, that's the flute sound on Strawberry Fields is the mellotron flute. And it's been used on quite a few tracks since then. I say a few, it's been used on loads since then. You hear it everywhere. But that was the one that was really, really famous. So Zed, really quickly, so Zed, the first part of Zed was written, I was still at that early stage of the album, and I wasn't getting anywhere, trying to work out, how to come up with ideas and find something that was going to stick. And I'd been on a flight over to Canada for the Celtic Colours Festival, and I had a bit of time to kill in the airport before the rest of the band arrived. And I had like a tiny little keyboard with me and my laptop, and I was sat in the cafe in the airport, and I started hammering the keys because I was so frustrated. I think partly because of the long flight and partly because I wasn't getting anywhere, and I think I must have been getting some really strange looks. But I managed to come up with something that I liked, finally, and it was the beginning of this. I think it was this kind of this keyboard just going around the two parts, but like a really kind of rhythmic kind of thing. And then the melody, it was one of these rare occasions where it kind of just flowed. It was a moment of flow, I suppose, where I had this kind of groove kind of going on, and I was like, I think I was so frustrated with trying to write a melody that fit into a certain box or whatever, that sounded like it was like Scottish tradition but slightly different. And I just thought, you know what, I'm getting so annoyed with this, I'm just going to see what happens. And I came up with this melody, and it's weird, and it jumps all around the place, and it's a bit strange, and it's really difficult to make it fit on the instruments that we were playing. But there was just something about it that I just really liked. And I remember taking it to Jarlath and Patsy and saying, "I'm really sorry, this is probably impossible to play," but they totally made it work. I actually called the track Frustration at the beginning because I was so frustrated. And then it ended up getting called Z only because I didn't have a name for it. And I just, rather than calling it Tune 2 or whatever, I thought I'll just name it a letter. And Z felt like the right letter for it. And I was going to change it, and everyone in the band said, "No, it's cool. Keep it." So it's called Z. Weird, but it kind of fits the tune. The tune kind of goes all over the place and zigzags around the place, so I guess Z kind of works. There's loads of layers in this. I can quickly go through. In case you hadn't already spotted, basically the second half of this is Wind in the Trees, the track from the first track on the album, just in a completely different key, and with loads of different ideas thrown at it. But I will very quickly kind of go through. We've got our drums, which are fairly standard the way they've been recorded. Stu did use like a couple of different snare drums. He had that really open kind of clangy drum for one of the parts, so that it just had a different kind of sound. But my favourite thing is the thing that he does in this breakdown section, where he does this really cool kind of hip hop kind of style kind of thing. Such a cool part. So yeah, you can actually hear how processed the drums are when I go to the mix. We really kind of process them quite a lot, because the sound is quite different. But there's, when we go into this next thing, such a cool part. Did a little bit more of that trash kit stuff on this one, but then it goes to those 808 sort of analog drum kit thing. But we go mad with the layers later on. What is it that happens? We've got some clap samples happening. We've got a layered like jig hi-hat rhythm happening. There's a cool thing that I'd forgotten about. It's a tom overdub. Loads of tom overdubs. This track, we really went to town on lots of different things. Oh, it's this thing here, isn't it? Yeah, I took that trash kit that he did, and I imported the sounds of all of the different sounds that he made into like a sampler, which meant I could actually play on a keyboard. I could actually like play a note, and it would play like, you know, him hitting the gas stove or whatever, and then hit another key and it would play like one of the springs on that weird kind of springy thing. But what it meant is I could actually program like an electronic drum beat using the sounds that Stu had played on that kit, and then I created this part. Which is kind of cool. Just the loads of ideas. I kind of felt with this one that I just wanted to throw every idea at it, just like not try and be subtle at all. And the chords change every time, like every part, the chords are different and the feel is different, the drum part's different, and there's loads of things thrown at it. And one of the reasons why I did that was because I felt like that was kind of it was a little bit of a nod to Treacherous Orchestra, because there was a lot of stuff that we did with Treacherous Orchestra that was a bit like that, where it was just like throwing loads of ideas at a tune, you know, and trying loads of different things. Treacherous Orchestra, that's us there in the Czech Republic. A brilliant festival, Colours of Ostrava. That was a total highlight for the band. So this track is kind of like a little bit of a nod to Treacherous, and just that kind of like more is more mentality, where we just throw loads of ideas at it. So there's just loads of things happening, loads of guitar parts. Weirdly, actually, the pipes and the fiddles, they've literally got one part each. The pipes just play one part all the way through. The fiddle, like Patsy's got one part, she plays all the way through. Laurie's got a part that she plays all the way through, and that's it. There's no layering of any of those guys, but the rhythm section there's just so much happening. Different keyboard parts, different guitar sounds, loads and loads of synths, loads and loads of drum kind of things, and far too many ideas. Does anyone need to rush away? I'm aware that we're after 12 o'clock now. Okay, I will very, very quickly just talk about Titans and then we'll be done. I could talk for days about this stuff, but I think it would get a bit boring. I really hoped to have found some old photos that have gone missing of when I went to Glastonbury Festival with some friends from school, and we would go like every year for about 4 or 5 years. And there's a classic photo of all of us just getting in this minibus all to head off to Glastonbury. I'd hope to be able to show that to you, but it can't be found at the moment. But that was the influence behind this track, was Glastonbury, and that's kind of one of the things I really think about when I listen to this is those kind of days when I went to Glastonbury and like would see like folk like bands like Orbital on the other stage. Just had a huge influence on me. So this kind of nods a little bit at that kind of stuff. But also it's, you know, it's something else as well. It's definitely, you know, a mixture of a whole lot of different things. Daft Punk were a big influence for this one. This one's got that that talk box thing on the lead. That's me just playing the melody on the Moog and the sound coming out of the talk box and just recording it on a microphone. We have that happening in the bass as well. One of my particularly sort of favourite parts on the album, which is when that first comes in, which is this part. It's that same kind of thing. It's just the bass part on its own. sounds fine, but adding those kind of talk boxes in, double tracked again, panned left and right, and it just kind of, again, it sounds like the synth is talking a little bit, which is kind of cool. And it's a lot of fun to do. So what else have we got on this one? This one, we did that same thing with the drums. The first time through the tune, there's this sort of big long intro section, and then the tune comes in, and to begin with, the drums are played as a drum part. But then that part that I just played with, where the Moog talk box comes in, the drums change, and I wanted to go somewhere between programmed and live with the drums. And to do that, we did that same thing. Where we had like, so that's the snare just on its own track, kick on its own track. What's this? That's that same sort of broken cymbal thing on the snare drum, just on its own track, or multiple tracks. There's various microphones used to get the sound, but the hi-hat part, we've got some toms recorded separately. So it just meant that everything kind of had its own space, and I could make things super tight so that it sounded like almost like a programmed kind of drum part, but it was played on real instruments. We've got a shaker and tambourine. We do have some electronic sounds as well that kind of go, well, that kind of electronic kind of stick sound. But sort of all together, it sounds like, it sort of sounds like a played drum part, but also like a really kind of perfect one. So yeah, that was the kind of plan with that. What else have we got happening? Talkbox. We've got some weird kind of synthy things, weird spacey synthy things happening. That's on the Korg. Weird kind of filter sweeps going on. They kind of disappear into the track a little bit, but you kind of catch them, just a little bit of movement. There's so much of that stuff happens, particularly on this track because there's loads of layers. We've got our standard kind of keys parts, guitar. We've got the epic guitar solo. Chaz had this idea of like playing a solo and then right at the very end having other guitars join it and just join it for one line. So you've got that kind of cool thing happening there. Various layered kind of pipes things. We did a thing where the pipes actually sound a little bit like a synth part. So the pipes actually sound a little bit like an arpeggiated synth. again, that was a lot of my process, was like, how do I make the acoustic instruments sound more electronic? How do I make the electronic instruments sound more real, you know? Double tracked whistle, fiddle. Oh yeah, Patsy, again, Patsy does a similar thing. So she's like doing just like a really rhythmic kind of fiddle part going on. And then there's that, which is again a bit more like the arpeggiator kind of thing. So just going for a similar kind of effect. I think that's pretty much everything on this track. Anyone have any questions about this particular track or anything? Does anyone have any questions about anything to do with the whole process of writing or recording any of this? Don't worry if you don't.
Would you have done anything different looking back now you're at the end of that process? Is there something you go back and or are you, is it like the culmination of everything is what it's about, rather than, do you find yourself nitpicking? Because that's always the problem, is to stop editing stuff. I find that really hard.
Deadlines are my best friend when it comes to that stuff, because I will edit and change and mess with things for as long as I have the time to do that. I mean, even like, you know, we had everything mixed, and it was still like, there was always kind of little things like, how can I, like, we're going to the next process, we're like finished the mixes, we're going to master, but I need to fix these things before it goes to master. And then the mastering process, which is like the final process in making a record, where you're just taking the mixes and making them sound, it's like using your EQ and your hi-fi, but a really advanced version of that to make it sound as sweet as possible. And I mean, that went on for quite a long time, because it was the last stage and I couldn't let it go. I was like, oh, it's not quite right, and I feel like just this hasn't really translated, and how do we, you know, I know that really what I should do is go back and re-record those drums and remix them, because that's the only way to make it sound like I want to. But what can we do in the mastering stage where it can make up for these things that I'm not too happy about? And we did. It's the longest I've ever spent on mastering a record, because there was so much of that went on, because I couldn't really let it go. So there's probably little things. There are things about it that I'm like, and it's maybe some of it is to do with the writing, but a lot of it is actually just down to the mixing of it. And it's, as I said, it's like I'm soloing parts and I'm like, oh, it's a shame you can't really hear that thing that I really like. You can't really hear that in the mix. And but time, you know, it was like I had a budget of a certain amount of time to mix it, and we did go over budget on it already. But there's just so many layers, so much to do, that there has to be a point where you just go, it sounds good and it works. It's maybe not exactly how I've pictured it in my head, but then there's things about it that are way better than what I pictured. So I don't know. And to answer your question, I'll always be thinking, oh, I've only done that, or maybe I should have done that differently. But I have to just move on and just kind of go, that's it. And it gets easier for me the more time passes, the more I can kind of accept that, actually, no, I like that. I wasn't too sure about that before, but now I think it's okay. Yeah, I guess I struggle with that perspective when I'm in the middle of it all. Do you find that yourself with your writing, with your books?
Yeah, I have to have deadlines, because I would just faff with things. Yeah, even now I'm doing a final read through of a novel and I'm just still finding things I'm like, oh, I just could have written that better. And you do just have to go, nope, that's fine. It's fine. No one else is going to see that. Right,
exactly. Yeah, no, it's a tough thing letting something go, particularly when it's something that it's really close to your heart, you know, something that you're really passionate about. It's really difficult, isn't it? Any other final questions?
Yeah, do you have any standard procedure concerning compression when you do your first mixes yourself? Because it's so dense, you can easily make it too flat.
Yeah, I guess I don't know whether I probably have certain things that I'll go to for different different instruments. I don't know whether I have like one kind of standard way of working. I think the more dynamic an instrument is, the more I'll lean on compression. You know, if something's not particularly dynamic, then the compressor's not going to be doing a lot. You know, and if it is doing a lot, you're probably squashing it too much. You know, but like the human voice it requires a good bit of compression because you're going between loud and soft all the time, and the compression will just help it just kind of sit forward. But I would say if there's something that I do regularly, then it is slow attack times and fast release times, because with a slow attack time you get so when I'm speaking, if a compressor's got a slow attack time, then you can hear all the consonants really clearly. Or if it's a drum hitting, like the stick hitting the drum, if it's a slow attack time, it takes a long time for the compressor to start working, so you get that punch. So everything sounds punchy with a slower attack time. And with a fast release time, it moves things forwards in the mix. It just if you do that on everything, then you will end up with everything sounding pretty, you know, everything's loud, everything's forwards, and you've actually not got that much kind of shape. But I think that's kind of a starting place for me, and then I'll maybe slow the attack time down, slow the release time down if I wanted to take a step back in the mix. You can actually use the attack and release times to mix if you've got like everything sitting at a relatively kind of good balance, kind of volume wise. Like you can make something sit further back in the mix by slowing the release time down, or equally by speeding up the attack time. You can again make it just kind of go backwards, and that way you can have front to back, everything's audible, but you know you've got depth to your mix. You've got the stuff that's super snappy and punchy up front, and the stuff that's a little bit kind of more squashed sounding will take a step back. So but I don't know if I could define like a standard procedure. I think everything's slightly different. There was a lot of compression used in the mix, multiple stages of compression used in the mix, which is kind of why everything's really kind of in your face. Yeah. Experiment. I'd be happy to help you out if there's actual individual things that you'd like help with, or that, like if there's give me some examples of some of the things you're doing. I'd be happy to help with. Any other questions?
Just wondering about the kind of order. With this project you had kind of background stuff already in a file, then you had the multi-track from that gig. Which sessions did you then do first? Did you do like melody and all that, and then lead drums and rhythm sections at the end?
Yeah, that is a good question. So one of the good things about having the multi-track from the gig, and actually, I think maybe I've got a couple of photos here.
And that multi-track sounds like a really nice guide track for then recording other stuff too.
So like this is the drums, this is the gig. I should have showed you these photos earlier actually. We had these plastic screens around the drum kit, which meant that the drums were actually really well isolated. There wasn't really a lot of sound, and we were all using in-ears or headphones for the gig, so there wasn't loads of loud monitors on stage. So the drums were like, you could hear a little bit of the PA system in the room, but really it was a really nicely isolated drum kit. So I could actually take I took the multi-tracks of the gig, and I even like tidied up the drums. I used like like basically quantizing, just using Beat Detective on Pro Tools, which you can make things that are slightly out of time, make them in time. And I could actually do that with these drums because they were so well isolated. And I had programmed some of the main keyboard parts. I played in some guide bass, and we had the drums from the live gig. We had a few other elements from the live gig, but mainly I took drums, and I had like guide bass and guide keyboards. So we actually started with the melody first for the actual real like recorded elements. And I wouldn't normally do that. It's a really difficult thing to start with melody first when if you don't have the right guides. But because I had the drums, not only was there like the feel and the kind of the arrangement there, but there was dynamics because it was the played drum parts from the gig. He'd been playing the dynamics, and he'd been following the dynamics of the arrangements. So everyone could respond to that. Everyone could actually record as if they were playing, with the band, So the guide tracks had really nice dynamics as well. So we recorded, I think the first thing I recorded was the pipes. And then Patsy put her fiddle parts down. And then what happened after that? I think after that we did the drums. I think we had Patsy, Jarlath, and then Patsy, and then we did the drums because then he had like the real melody to play to. I couldn't really use the melody recordings from the gig. They weren't. There was a bit of noise, but also just like there was quite a few changes that I made as well to the arrangement. So the melodies weren't exactly right, and sometimes they weren't played brilliantly on the gig. It was the first gig. So there was maybe sort of a few moments where it wasn't quite right, but once the melody was recorded, then we did the live drums. I did for the electric guitar. I actually just went up to Chaz lives in Oban. I just drove up to Oban with just a little bit of kit, and we just recorded the guitars just direct in, and I just used like amp emulations. Like he had his pedals and everything, he had his distortion and his delays and everything, but I used a emulation of guitar amps. I mean, I was using this for my own purposes, but when we actually mixed it, we used something a lot better. The best thing we used was a Strymon pedal. Can't remember what it's called, but it's like a guitar amp emulator pedal, and it sounds incredible. So we just re-recorded, like we took the output of the recorded guitar, put it through this pedal, and then back in again, and it sounded like it was recorded through really nice guitar amp. So we did the guitars just up in Oban after that, and then, as I say, I sent the files to Angus. He just recorded all the keyboard parts in MIDI. I recorded all of my parts at home. Laurie put her parts down later on. She put her fiddle and vocal parts down later. We just did that here as well, just in this room. So the pipes and the fiddles and the vocals and all of my parts were recorded in here. The drums were recorded in Glowworm in Glasgow. And then the keyboards and guitars, they could have been recorded anywhere because they weren't actually recorded in a room. They were just direct in. So that was the process. So having that, like the live gig, was that's how it went so smoothly. I'll say smoothly. It still took a lot of work, but that was how that worked out. Yeah, a lot of the sounds are, I mean, all the synth sounds, like either using kind of soft synths on the computer or using my synths here. A big part of the sound of the record is all of those kind of synths and everything. So again, they could have been done anywhere, and they were. Some of it was just done like if I was on the road with a band, I would have my laptop and a little keyboard with me, and I'd be kind of layering up synth sounds. That Jupiter part at the beginning of Barnacary Bay, I remember that was done at like 3 a.m. like hurtling up the M6, coming back from a Kate Rusby gig. Stevie Burns was driving up the road, and I just had my headphones on, like trying to find a solution for this thing. So yeah, it was done all over the place. Cool. So any final questions at all? Anything else? All good. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for supporting me and the album. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully there will be a gig at some point. There's a little bit of chat about a potential gig, but I don't know what's going to happen at the moment. But hopefully at some point there will be a gig where we can come out and play this. Yeah, hopefully I'll see all of you somewhere. Different places, I'm sure, but come and say hi. If I'm ever doing a gig with anyone and you're in the audience, please come and say hi. So thanks very much, guys, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you later.
Yeah.